Okay, today we're going to talk about it's a skill that you'll see in reading and in social studies. So this week you see it in social studies. That's why this lesson goes with your social studies. But you're also going to start seeing it in reading. So we're going to talk about first-hand and second-hand accounts. That's what they're called in reading. In social studies, they're called primary and secondary sources. They're the same thing. They just have different names. So first-hand versus second-hand. So first-hand or second-hand accounts, or in social studies, primary and secondary sources, there are multiple accounts of the same event. So they might tell the same story, they're just going to tell it from different perspectives, different point of view. A first-hand account is a primary source. So in this lesson, you learned about, they talk about primary sources. So a primary source is a first-hand account. That means that the description of the event, of whatever it is that we're learning about that's happening, it's coming from somebody who was there to see it or experience it. So if it's a primary source, the person who wrote it, who's telling you about it, they were there when it happened. A lot of times your primary sources, your first-hand accounts, are going to be seen in diaries or journals or interviews or autobiographies. So if we look at the word autobiography, this prefix, auto, means self. Bio means life. And graph means to write about. So that means that in autobiography, you are writing about the life of yourself. Sometimes when we talk about root words and prefixes and suffixes, we've got to kind of manipulate that. But in autobiography, somebody is writing about their self. They're writing about their own life. Well, nobody knows what happens in your life better than you do. So you would be the primary source in an autobiography. Speeches and then letters and emails can also count as primary sources. So a lot of times a primary source or a first-hand account, it's going to have personal opinions and lots of feelings and emotions because you're there, you're experiencing it. It's also going to have a lot more specific details because if you were there, you should be able to give more specifics than somebody who wasn't there. Your first-hand accounts and primary sources are going to be told in first-person point of view. You're going to use words like I, me, my, we, our, us because you're there. You're part of it. In contrast to that, we have our second-hand accounts or our secondary sources. So first-hand accounts, primary sources, you are there. Second-hand accounts or secondary sources, that's the description of an event based on either research, you've read a lot about it, you have written about it, or somebody's told you something that happened, but you were not there when the event happened. So you'll find a lot of this information in encyclopedias, in textbooks, and biographies. So biographies are books written about somebody's life, but the person whose life they're about didn't write them. So if I wrote a book about my life, if it was Mrs. Saunders, her life, and I'm the author, that's a first-hand account. That's a primary source. I can write about my life and be a first-hand. I was there. But if somebody else wants to write a book about my life, well, they're not me. So they're going to have to do research. They're going to have to talk to me. They're going to have to figure all these things out about my life. They're going to be a secondary source or a second-hand account. And some newspaper and magazine articles can also be second-hand if you have to do research and you're not there when they happen. So your second-hand, secondary sources, they're going to have maybe more facts and information because that's what they've had to research. They're also probably going to pull information from several different sources. So if I want to write an article about when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech, well, I wasn't even born then. So I can't be a primary source. I wasn't there. Can't time travel. But maybe I'm going to read the speech. I'm going to read some interviews of Dr. Martin Luther King. And maybe I'm going to read some textbooks of information other people have gotten from their research. So I'm going to pull information from lots of different sources to write my second-hand account or my secondary source. This is going to be told in third-person point of view. If I'm writing about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I'm going to use words like he, his, theirs, because I'm not part of that. I wasn't there. So first-hand and second-hand account is what they are called in reading. In social studies, like the lesson you're doing today, they're going to be primary and secondary sources, but they're the same thing.